Right. Are we ready? Good morning, folks, to another of our weekly talks, and a interesting talk today, which is by our friend Patsy, and she's titled her talk as Early Teaching Attempts, Learning on the Job. And don't we all, Patsy?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, well, I never intended or expected to be a teacher. The teachers that I had known at school were very strict. Everyone made jokes about how narrow their lives must be. They were mainly single ladies, but they were very strict. They knew their stuff too. But they were the only teachers I knew. And I definitely didn't want to be like that. I mean, I was quite clear. I didn't want to be like that. I wanted a much more exciting life. I read travel books and read maps from an early age. And what I was into was foreign travel, working abroad, doing dramatic things. My parents perceived this tendency and thought being a teacher would be a much better idea, providing a reasonable salary into my old age and perhaps keeping me out of trouble. They were working class people, and to them, a teacher would have been the highest job they could imagine me having. They just didn't know. Well, we didn't know of career women. We only knew about women who got married and women who taught because they hadn't got a husband to provide for them. That is the level of knowledge which we had. I was born in 1944, so I can't remember. Think now. I think I went to grammar school in 1955. Certainly, I went up to university in 1962. I wasn't pretty, and I suppose they thought, well, she's not going to get a husband. Best thing is let's work on this teacher thing. Anyway, so that had no effect on me whatsoever. I had heard about the Foreign Office. I could tell by the word Foreign Office it must be good, and the kind of thing that I was interested in. It was before reading about spy stories, etc. But I did. I was good at writing letters. My O-level university, O-level GC had taught me this, and I wrote enough letters to get a holiday job, sorting files in the base. They were all paper in those days. In the basement of the Foreign Office, one university summer, and I worked in France as a monitrice, a sort of carer in a children's holiday camp, another summer. And I went up to university in 1962. I went to read English because that was what I was good at, and everyone said English was what I ought to do. What I was interested in was languages, and I could already speak French and German, and I taught myself Spanish. And at university, I did something called Spanish subsidiary. So I was all set in my own mind to travel. Unfortunately, another part of me wanted a different kind of happiness, and I'd acquired a boyfriend at school, and we continued together. And I'm afraid I got pregnant while I was still at university. In those days, you were lucky not to be sent down if you were female and got pregnant, because it was thought your days at university must, of course, be over. But I managed to. Richard Hogger was my tutor, and he persuaded them I had exceptional promise, which wasn't true. Anyway, I was allowed to stay at university and take my degree. And I then moved down to Bournemouth, where my husband was doing something which was called a sandwich course. we didn't know about things like benefits. I don't even know if they were around then. I was totally ignorant of things like that. My parents thought you lived within your income. If you didn't, well, anyway, we didn't know anybody who didn't. You just had less. So obviously that was the thinking that my husband and I took on. We didn't look around. We lived on his student grant, which was more generous than a simple student grant because he was also with the sandwich course. You used to work sort of on the job at a power station. He was an electrical engineer at a power station for 6 months and then at a nearby training college for 6 months, and that went on for about 5 years. Um, so we were living on that, and by then we had a second child. So it was, I got very good at discovering things like haslet to put in his sandwiches. Haslet is a disgusting substance made of some kind of corn. I don't know, poor man. Anyway, so I was quite desperate to earn more money. And the only thing I could think of doing, the only skill I imagined I must have was teaching. I thought I could teach because you may not believe this. I had never heard of teacher training colleges. Um, and as far as I knew, what you did was you got your degree and then you started teaching. And in fact, that was the case in those days very frequently. Um, so I applied to the local authority to teach. I pointed out I had a good degree in English. Um, and surprise, surprise, they gave me a job part time. I now look back on this with shame, but all I can say is I didn't know any better. Um, I modelled myself on the old grammar school teachers um, who were very strict. Um, and I truly believed that if I wasn't strict, the class would run riot. And I was actually terrified of these children. Um, I knew my subject well. I was good at the grammar side and at the literature side, so I wasn't worried about that. And it hadn't occurred to me that there was something as well as control and knowledge, and it was sort of empathy between yourself and the students. And I'm afraid at that stage in my life, how old was I? 22. And I didn't know what I was doing really. They shouldn't have taken me on. Anyway, my first school, fortunately, it was a temporary job. It was just for the summer term. I'm very glad that was the case because at least I could leave at the end, taking my errors and shame with me. Um, it was a girls' school too, so I thought, well, that's good. I haven't got a. I used to be terrified of boys, so I was very relieved that this first job was at a girls' school. Um, it was in quite a posh area, and although it was a state school, but it was quite a posh area, and the girls were quite well educated, well mannered, and so on. Um, so, it might have gone quite well. Unfortunately, this idea I had about discipline being essential, the most important thing, is one I carried in front of me like a shield. And these girls were well mannered anyway. They didn't need a complete stranger marching in saying, sit, and don't speak without your hand up. And um, it went badly. They learned not to take any notice of what I said. So they would carry on talking. It didn't seem to make any difference what I said or did. They still carried on talking. So on my first day, I said that if they didn't complete the piece of work that I'd given them, which they obviously weren't going to do because they were talking all the time, if they didn't complete it, they would have to stay in until they finished it. Now, I don't know where I got the idea that I could say such a thing. I mean, you cannot actually enforce a class of, I think it was about 35 girls of age approximately 14 to stay in after school without prior arrangement. But even then, when a lot of rules of safety and so on were not in place. You can't do that. But I hadn't had teacher training, and neither had I talked to any other teachers since I left school, so I had no background knowledge. So I just said this. And then and we all sort of sat there, and there was a bit of a stunned silence, and some of them did start working too. However, come, we'll say 4:15, because I can't really remember exactly what time we were finishing. First of all, there was a bit of a noise of pens, nothing much. And then one girl got up and walked out. And then another girl got up and walked out. And then the whole lot went out, leaving me sitting at the desk with an empty classroom. I will leave it to your imagination as to how I felt. The embarrassment. I could see that what I'd done was a total disaster. I had no idea what to do. I went home and cried and talked. I think my husband must have been at home, because I know I talked to somebody, and it must have been him. And he was kind and reassuring. And I said I could never go back. And he said, "Well, you have to go back. You must go back and face them." And I can't tell you. I don't think I slept that night at all. A mixture of fear and embarrassment and shame, because I knew I'd pulled it off wrongly. I'd done it wrong. And I didn't know enough about young girls to know how they might be feeling. But I had to go. So I went in the next day, comes the English session, and they all came in, they sat down, and they were quiet. So I started teaching, got them to do some work. It wasn't totally quiet, mind, but it was quietish, And after that, they were pleasant and polite. And I cannot offer you any explanation for this. I do not think for one moment that it was anything to do with me. I think possibly, this is speculation. They as I say, they were of it was a reasonably well-off area. They will have gone home and talked about it. Maybe their parents said, "Look, she's probably new. She probably didn't know what she was doing. Why don't you try being nice to her?" Maybe it was that. I don't have no idea. But they were quite subdued, relatively. They were quite friendly, and certainly I never did such a thing again. I learned that you must not make any threats which you are not certain you can carry out. And in fact, try not to make threats at all, because it's not a good way forward. In the end, I had quite a nice time for the rest of the term. The girls were quite friendly. I think maybe they just accepted that I was new and a bit stupid, and I hadn't known what I was doing, and I seemed all right generally. I don't know. Anyway, that was just a one-term job, but I got a decent reference, for goodness knows on what ground, and this enabled me the following year to get something. It was called 7/10. It was part-time 7/10. I had to pay a neighbour to look after the children who were born in 62 and 64. I hope I've got that right. I often get the dates wrong. I think 64 and 66 the kids were born. And so they were still little girls. They were too young to go to play school. And so a neighbour looked after them. So off I go on my bicycle. I was lucky because really we were living then in a part of Southampton called Totton, which is near the estuary. So it was a very nice bike ride to work, right across the part of the Southampton estuary and into an area of Southampton. So sorry about that. My dog doesn't like having a cone on her head, and when she's shaking herself, it makes a rattling noise. Maybe you couldn't hear it, but sorry about that. So I used to bike across to this school. This was a different sort of school. It was co-educational, and it was a working class area of Southampton. I had not got great confidence, especially as it was a mixture of boys and girls, and I'd never taught boys. I was pretty frightened of boys. I thought maybe I'd got the hang of girls now. I was quite wrong there. Um, anyway, so I was better prepared, and at least I had a healthy approach to getting there. So I was feeling in good shape when I used to arrive. Um, I did find it was very different. I don't know if it was because I'd learned something in the previous term or whether it was the children at the school, but it was a reasonably good, pleasant atmosphere from the beginning. There were boys who were a bit rowdy, but if you glared at them, they stopped being rowdy. Um, there was one girl who unfortunately had a brother who unfortunately had been at college with my husband. So she felt she was friends already, and she stood up and introduced herself. And not knowing any better is all I can say. I sort of slapped her down, because I was embarrassed and I didn't know what to do. So I told her to sit and I sort of ignored her. And she was an absolute pain for the rest of the term. She made as much trouble as she could because I had humiliated her. For which anyway, I come the end of the term, I made an approach to her on a one-off basis, and I said something that probably I shouldn't have done. I asked if she'd like to come round and meet the children. And because she didn't live far away, so she did. She came round and met the children, and she became a sort of family friend. I would not say this is a great way to do things, though. It was just what came into my head as maybe it's a good idea, and it's what I did on that occasion. She was a perfectly nice girl, but as I say, I had humiliated her without even thinking I was doing such a thing. Another, I'm sure, not suitable thing I learned to do was the value of separating difficult children from the others. Something I used to do was bring ones who were being a pain down to the front and engage them in conversation or keep them afterwards for a happy chat and talk about the things they were interested in. So try and separate out and so on. Um, but I don't know that that would be approved now. Also, I don't think it's likely that they still have classes in that way. We had classes where the children were normally already there in rows, and they had places where they were meant to stay. And so you could do things like saying, John, could you come and sit over here, please? And John will come. Now, whether John will come today is another matter. I don't know. And of course, whether I should have asked John to come today is also another matter. But it's what I did as a coping mechanism. Um, on a much more positive side, I did actually begin to enjoy it. We had a discussion session once a week, and all the children used to look, all the classes did that. They all looked forward to it. They took it in turns to bring a topic. Um, there was also a thing on at the time about conservation. I, as with a lot of other people, completely misunderstood what conservation was about. I think I kind of thought it was keeping things nice. It was about keeping, conserving an orderly, tidy countryside and streets rather than a more holistic interpretation. So I got a conservation group together of children, and we used to go on Saturday mornings picking up litter, and we got our pictures in the paper, and lots of commendations for this. But whether that should have been called a conservation project, I'm not sure. I mean, it was conservation the environment in one sense, but in another, it was pretty pointless. I mean, the council should have been doing it, really, not us. Anyway, so I was still insisting on what I'd been taught at school when it came to teaching English, which was the importance of spelling. We had spelling once a week, and of course grammar. And I had piles of books I took home every night to correct, and the children were meant to do their corrections, which they usually did. Um, But things were changing in the English department. There was the appearance at that time. I wonder what year I'm in now. 68. I'm guessing at 68. Um, Projects had appeared. The idea of interesting children in a project and not worrying too much about things like their grammar and their spelling. So bringing together several what were used to be called subjects under a sort of general knowledge heading. And my head of department was very keen on those. I was a bit behind. I couldn't see how I was going to find time for these projects and also carry on with all the spelling and the grammar. So there was a bit of what you could call tension between us in that respect. It wasn't that I didn't like the idea for the project, although I was less enthusiastic than he was, but I was worried about what I thought of as most important with English. Um, but in retrospect, I'm not at all sure that I was right about that. Anyway, but by now, I was really, frankly, finding it a terrific struggle. I had the two children. My husband was away half of the 60%. It's right in a minute. 50% of the time he wasn't at home. He was out at one of the other power stations, and he had to stay in digs overnight. So it was quite hard to be doing a 7/10 teaching job, marking in the evenings, also looking after two children, doing the washing and the cleaning in that period of time. Um, I think I really enjoyed it though. I think I think it was a challenge, but I was young and I was strong, and I, I I couldn't possibly do it today, but I did do it then. And I was there for 2 years doing that sort of thing. And then my husband qualified and we had to leave the area. I hated leaving the South Coast, which is beautiful and wonderful with children because you've got the beaches. Um, but by then, at least I could manage a class. I hadn't learnt too much about how to teach, but I had learnt how to manage a class, which I appreciate isn't the same thing. So off I went, and that was the end of what I call my early teaching career. And I can see that having intended this to take 40 minutes, I've only taken 24. And I really would have thought that after doing these groups for this long, I would have been able to do that better. I do apologise. Are there any questions, please? You'll have to work hard because there's only 8 of us here.
Yeah, I muted a few people, so everybody can unmute now. Actually, that was lovely. I was really feeling for you all the way through that, and you know, you're very open and honest about the challenges, and it makes a lovely story. I could see how it could be difficult being inside it, but to hear it, when you know, it's just like, yeah, that's what it's like. You're young, you haven't got a clue, you're trying to figure stuff out, and you're very open about it. It's lovely.
It just, you know, I look back, I feel so sorry for the children because they should have had better. They should have had better, you know. But well, not that sorry, but a bit sorry for the children. I really think that we should have had to have teacher training before we got our hands on the children. I really do.
We never forget our teachers, do we? It doesn't matter how old you are.
No.
And your honest
Some of
talking
them.
put me back in the classroom. Yeah, it was wonderful. Wonderful.
We had some. I mean, we had teachers who definitely didn't want to teach. You know, they all seemed to know their subject really well, but they really didn't want to be in the classroom. We had one teacher who did, and he was brilliant. He was a geologist and a walker, and he absolutely enthused us all with, you know, as to well, what rocks, walking, contours. We learned so much stuff from him. And he was so enthusiastic. He ought to have a medal. I have had a medal. But most of the teachers I have myself, you could tell they didn't really want to be there.
We have another teacher with us today. I think, Graham, you were going to say something just then.
Well, first of all, to thank Patsy for her account, which reminded me of coming into the teaching profession rather later on, when we knew things about teacher training. So I did a postgraduate teacher training year at Birmingham University in the 1960s, no earlier than that, where, among other things, I found Valerie. So later on we got married. But the most valuable part of that year was teaching practice, where you went out to a school for 3 weeks or something and made your mistakes there in an environment where the normal teacher was present and could sort one out. And I remember at the school in Birmingham, they were just starting on the I think it was the trigonometry part of the math syllabus, and I had this in my head, quite ready, started off, and there were no questions. There didn't seem to be any problem, so I carried on, and I actually completed the whole syllabus in one lesson. Without realizing that they didn't have a clue as to what I was. So, yeah.
But at least they listened.
Yes.
I certainly did that. Angela.
Yeah, I'm an early years education specialist, 3 to 8. After 8, I don't have a clue, but I loved it. I remember going around the school where I became the head teacher and going, the then head teacher said, oh, just go around all the classes, you know, I'm not in control of you. So I went into one classroom and I saw a little boy sitting on the mat, and I said, oh, what's your name? And he said, fuck off. I thought, this is going to be an interesting school, and it was. But I mean, my question was, in the ILEA, at any one time in the school where I became the head teacher, there were 13 different languages spoken in the school, and we valued that. We really valued the home languages of the children. And we had Roma children as well. And we had children who, you know, whose family had been kicked off their land in Ireland because of the enclosures, kicked off their land in Kent because of the enclosures. You know, these vile things that the lords of the manor did. I'm sorry to get on my pedestal, but you know, it was a working class school, but it was fascinating, really fascinating. And I just think, you know, the education of 3 to 8 year olds, you're laying the it used to be called the foundation course. You know, they come to you and you think, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do anything with these children. They're going to drive me mad. And after a term, they would put their hand up if they wanted to say something. They knew how to write their name, and they knew to go from left to right. And they could say this was 5 and this was 10. And wonderful. I did enjoy it. But it was, not without its challenges.
Patsy, you were saying that when you came into school, the fearful bit of going into school new habitat. Yes, I remember that as well, you know, because I worked in special schools, you know, and my training basically was as kind of a new house parent in a school for disturbed children. And I had this group that I had to look after. and it wasn't fun because this guy here thought he didn't have a temper until the children showed me that I did. And it was that type of thing, you know, and it was an amazing school because it had lots of amazing people in, lots of amazing teachers. Some of them were as daft as a box of frogs, but you know, but some were very good. And there's a story which I remember very well, is that I was standing in the hall chatting to the headmaster, who was an amazing, colourful character. And we was chatting away about different children. Then suddenly this child, who had obviously had an argument with the headmaster, which he thought wasn't settled or satisfactory. So he came running at the headmaster with a dining room knife, which was it couldn't cut butter basically, but it was, he still thought it was, and running at him. And John, without a beat, kind of still chatting with me, raised his leg and kicked the knife out of this child's hand while catching it and still chatting with me. You know, you go, wow, where do I learn to do that? But you know, that's my first experience of in that type of thing, and also went on to get higher and higher jobs in the profession. But yeah, you have to learn. You have to be on the job to learn to actually manage children. You know? Yeah. And as Angela was saying, you know, you get so used to children swearing at you and doing other things. You know? Yes. But anyway, Mary.
Does anyone have any sympathy for Offsted? You've heard about this head teacher committing suicide, but my feeling is they must have had good reasons to downgrade.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
I don't know. The original idea of Offsted is that they would help the school improve. Then in came the chemist and that lot, and it was about punishment, about showing the school was inadequate and really not as good as a private school. Sorry, I'm cynical about that. Offsted had good, you know, it had, its birth was full of improving schools, because schools are really complicated places, really complicated.
I wonder if there isn't the likelihood that the school examiners in Offsted feel the same uncertainties, you know, as Patsy does as a teacher. You know, anybody who's put in a position of authority without training and experience is potentially just going to act like a bully anyway for the fun of it, or is going to become, you know, concerned, reflective, and all those things. And it may be that, I mean, I look a lot at systems and how they fail, and the failure of systems is often not because of the people inside the system. It's the setup of the system that causes the people to have difficulties. Like Patsy saying, oh, you didn't know about teacher training. And, you know, when Graham says he went out to a school and you had a teacher with you there, so there's somebody to get, you know, that makes complete sense. But if you're thrown into it with no help, like Patsy was, and I imagine Ofsted examiners might be the same, you know. So, you know, the interesting question is, you know, can we learn from all these experiences and design systems that work better, and create structures in which we get to discuss how to design systems that work better, rather than saying, oh, well, that's up to the politicians. Whereas we know that the politicians are themselves systemically incompetent, and spending all their time trying to figure out, well, who knows what at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is state schools are not private schools. You know, state schools don't have as much money. They don't necessarily have the support of parents. You know, they accept everyone in the catchment area, and many of them succeed brilliantly.
They used to be. Sorry, carry on, Greg.
The Offsted system seems to be based on setting a date in advance, and until that date arrives, the head teacher and staff are scared stiff of what Offsted are going to discover, and do everything they can to hide it and create a good impression on the days when the Offsted inspectors come in. And then the outcome is a report which grades the school and obviously affects its reputation in the area and its ability to attract children and teachers. The old system was to have school inspection under the control of the local authority. And I feel no inspection is valid if the subject doesn't knows about it in advance. Inspection should be the dropping in of inspectors unannounced, identifying weaknesses and cooperating, not assessing, cooperating with the head teacher and relevant teachers to improve, to make the school even better than it is. I think that kind of approach would be more effective than the present one.
Carry on, Mary.
I had a friend who had a disruptive son, and she got a letter from the head teacher saying, please, on the 15th of October, don't send him to school because there was going to be an Ofsted inspection.
So, Patsy, how are we as a class? How would you bring us to order? What are your reflections as you listen to us discussing, and you're thinking, you know, how does that relate back to what it was like for me?
Well, the big thing is how sad I am that I didn't have training. But you know, one of the reasons, not the most admirable reason, was that when I was still at school in sixth form, we were advised strongly as to what road to take, which is why I did English and didn't follow up on all my modern languages. The profile of the girls and boys who were going to go to university was the highest, and then the next level down, the ones whose exam results weren't expected to be quite so good, they were the ones going to teacher training college, and then lower still were the ones who were going to go and do something like a secretariat course. So that was how we were taught to perceive it, and I think that's obviously very sad and a great shame, but also it was damaging to how I saw the idea of teacher training. I not only never thought I needed it, I didn't think it applied to me. I thought it was for other people. I was given the impression, or perhaps I should say, let me think, I was happy to receive the impression that I was too good to need teacher training. I knew my stuff. I didn't need to go to teacher training. I don't know if I took that on board and I thought that, but I don't remember hearing about anyone who did their degree at that time and then did teacher training. Because I don't think they had that 1 year postgrad course then. I think you would have had to have gone around and done another 3 years or something like that. I could be wrong, I've no idea really, but I think that could be the case. But it's such a shame, you know, because I could have made a much better job of what I had to do for financial reasons, but nevertheless, the children and I could have got far more out of it if I'd had a slightly better idea. If I just had a mentor, if I'd had a person at the school that I could refer back to. What I actually had in each school I went to was a head teacher who effectively said, get on with it, you know, sink or swim, off you go. Here's a push, you know, and that would, so it certainly wasn't the kind of supportive network that I could have had, and that would have been valuable. But maybe the teachers themselves. I wonder. I'm just postulating this. We're talking about the 1960s. Do you think it's possible that secondary school teachers themselves didn't have a high opinion of the job they were doing? Do you think, was anyone
Christopher?
Yeah, I think it's not. I don't think it was. Sorry, it's not only amongst teachers that people assumed at that time if you had a degree, you could do things. You know, you didn't need extra training. You knew what. So I think you know, that was not unusual at all. Yes, when I was not knowing what I wanted to do once I got my not very good degree, people were saying I ought to be an algebra teacher, but I knew I couldn't control the good children, you know, that like I was, let alone the rest of them. So I didn't go that way. Whether I missed a very fulfilling life, I don't know, but yeah.
I think I went into teaching through the playgroup movement and through the tape recorder. What the tape recorder did was actually enable researchers to tape their children learning language. And when children practiced language was in the cot in the evenings when there was nobody there. And there were the most amazing studies about how, you know, a newborn will have all the sounds in the language, and they concentrate in the end on those sounds that are in the language, the target language, so that if mum speaks one language and dad speaks another, they get that combination. Because I was a head teacher in Hackney where there were lots of different languages, and there was the most exciting work done with young researchers actually telling us what they'd found out about. There was a book called by Ruth Weir called Language in the Cot, and it was about how young humans learn and practice language, and it was just so exciting. You know, I had children that age, and just fascinating observing how they learnt languages was enthralling as far as I was concerned.
It's very different, I think, to the lack of understanding that I had experienced when I was at school, and which unfortunately I carried on with me into my own teaching. You know, very shuttered world by comparison with that. That sounds so exciting, but and you know, a lot of it I do think was fear. You know, was fear of experiment, fear of losing your job, fear of being different, which in itself was something you weren't meant to be. And of course, both of the areas I've described, that was Bournemouth and Southampton, the area I was in anyway, they were really quite conservative areas. They were white, and there wasn't this, there wasn't that much variety. But also the teachers, they were, the word that comes to me is shuttered. You know, they were quite frightened. They were protective of their knowledge, and they liked to dole it out in labelled, measured pieces. And that's what I learned to do. But I did unlearn it in the end. But that's what I initially learned to do, and I think it's was a tragic waste for the children involved.
Do you think class was also part of the ugly equation that seems to be
Or-
a negative influence on every single aspect of
Yes.
life still in this country?
Yes, yes, I do. I
Who?
mean, oh, sorry, am I talking?
No, you carry on, carry on.
I've been reading a book recently. I've lent it to my friend. I can't remember what it's called, which is typical. It's it's got a picture of a white bow tie on the front, and it's about toffs basically, and it gives a lot of information which I didn't have before about Eton and the whole system of Eton into Oxford, and what it's like if you get into Oxford by a different route, and how the expectation of privilege is that these children are surrounded by it from the beginning, and they're given aspects of education which are completely denied to working class children, but they've got them right from the beginning. They've got kind of a broad knowledge of many fields at a phase in life when someone like me wouldn't have recognised the word sociology, or indeed geology. You know, anything even mildly out of, not maths, arithmetic rather, arithmetic, English, history, geography, words that I would recognise, they would be gross simplifications, I would say, to children of that background, because they have all the nuances already there, spread out before them, and they know how to access them. And I was very shocked by this book because I kind of knew in theory, you know, about the 1%, but I really, with the detail, you know, you could get me out there. Now I can walk better. You can get me out there with a red flag anytime.
Who remembers?
I'll join you.
It's dreadful. It's shocking. It's shocking.
Who remembers the Tory Education Minister Keith Joseph?
Oh yes.
The amusing thing about him was that he never went to school. All through his life, all through his childhood, he had private tutors,
Right.
and he was taught in that way, and then went on to Cambridge to get the degree that which got him to the path upwards type of thing, you know. And this says a lot, I think, about the, as Angela said, the kind of the class system, where in the private schools you are taught in the fact it's the cut and thrust of argument, it's the thinking for yourself, it's showing you that, you know, that you are a clever and encouraging person. But if you get to the state school, where Mr. Grindgrad said it's facts, 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 children were sat in front of the class and were taught it's this, this, this. Don't argue about it. Don't ask questions about it. You know, just listen to these type of things, you know. And that is the difference of education in that sense I've always found. And may I nip across and say, David, you were talking once, I remember at the meeting house, about the computers in schools and the new ideas of computerization within teaching.
Yeah, well, I'm when Angela started talking about what you know, that tape recording language came to my school as a language laboratory. You know, we and it was tape recorders to use to help people learn languages. So the sort of you know, and my life has been the introduction of technology, and I had the privilege, like Patsy, of jumping into a job completely unprepared, because I studied chemistry at university, had a bad experience as an intern working for a chemical company, realized that chemists didn't know what they were doing and were messing up the planet, and I didn't want to be one. Did a quick Christmas course with a company, and I ended up joining a company as a computer programmer, right? And I was thrown in a room with a few other guys, and we were sort of told, you know, we need a program for this. And we weren't even taught computer programming. I mean, you know, here's a manual. So, you know, two or three of us graduate recruits were thrown in a room in Gosforth, near Newcastle, the head office of Procter & Gamble, to write programs, and it was all learning on the job. And you know, I think that, but I think the impact of technology, you know, there was a time when, like with flying, you know, remember with flying, it was, you know, can man ever fly, right? You know, and then it was, oh yeah, well, if it's lighter than air, but yeah, but what about heavier than air? And then yeah, what about for the unprivileged? And then it becomes, are we going to be able to stop people flying, right? And it's like the technology. For a while, it was, are computers going to be, what's going to be the impact of computers on education? And a school would have a room with a computer. And then there was a huge debate in the computer industry over a long time about the idea of children having their own. And it was one laptop per child project. And what are we going to do for children in developing countries? And then you hear these pivotal stories, right? And there was this person talking about being in a slum in Africa, right? Totally, you know, poverty, abject poverty. The children have got nothing, right? And a mobile phone rings, and it's the kid's mobile phone. And this is, you know, the one laptop per child ideal becomes every child, even in a slum, has got a computer in their hand. And in some strange way, they've got access to the rest of the world. And I went on a course in Nepal, 18 days at 6,000 feet or something. And it was a complete retreat and miles from nowhere. And we were just going to be in silence. And what you saw, the abiding memory, was of all the young people who were staff in the hotel crowded around the computer, playing games and learning about computers in this poverty-stricken country. So I think there's a revolution going on at the moment in how fast we learn, how we get information, you know, and the moment the Americans are discussing whether TikTok's a good influence or a bad influence. And the president of TikTok gave in his introductory speech, said, well, we're introducing math skills courses for teenagers. You know, we're introducing educational training as to make better education available to everybody. You know, I'm kind of blown away by it, but it's so interesting, I think, for all of us to have, you know, grown up in this age where, you know, as a young person, Patsy, you were thrown right in at the deep end. And here we are, you know, on Zoom, a diverse group discussing our experiences of learning in a way that one wouldn't have believed many years ago. So yeah, thanks for pulling that out of me, Ray. Sorry, I don't know if that's even a useful contribution, but I think, you know, to look at how it was, this is what it was like when we started out, is basically what you've been telling us. And we're thinking, oh my God, yeah, wow, gosh. And there have been improvements, as Graham's saying, you know, that you could go to a teacher training college, you would get time out in a school, you'd get feedback and so on. And yes, there's this scary Offsted bit. And then we're learning that, you know, even people in Offsted are terrified about what's going, you know, we're in this amazing melting pot at the moment.
Here's a story which that Graham, you were talking about Birmingham University in the Birmingham area. I was chatting to a friend's grandmother a while ago now, must be years ago now, but she remembers the people who got thrown out of Uganda during Amin's time, and all these Asian people as refugees coming to the Birmingham schools. And she said when she was teaching there, these children would come in, and the young girls would come in, and they'd come in with their best clothes because they were going to school. And unfortunately, their best clothes were very light, bright, silky types, wafty type of stuff, and jeweled sandals and this type of thing in the middle of Birmingham's winter. You know, so she said we had to quickly encourage the parents to find, you know, kind of warm clothes like duffel coats and good shoes and all this lot for the children, the boys and the girls to wear type of thing, because for them education was an amazing thing. Education to them was a privilege that they would have and they would actually go to. So they wore all their best clothes, you know, which the Birmingham winter was not a lot of fun.
Yes. I did 3 years in Birmingham, and oh, I was so cold, you know. I mean, 62, you know, you were talking about a small radiator, one small radiator, and trying to dry your clothes in front of it and huddle in front of it. Oh, I have never been so cold. And I never got the Birmingham cold. It's on a plateau, isn't it? So it's right in the middle of England on a plateau. So it's much colder than you think, but you know, for where it is.
One of the things that we used to do in the infant school where I was a head teacher is get children to talk about their best friend. And it was one of the measures of success, as far as I was concerned, that a child's best friend was not from the same background as them, but it could be, you know, oh, well, she likes the same sweets as me, or she's left-handed like me. And that seemed to me, I remember going home talking to my daughters saying, I actually think, and I often didn't think this, I've got a successful school, because the children were mixing. It wasn't as it was in some, I know from being an advisory teacher, some of the church schools were appalling at their whiteness. I remember talking to a head teacher of a school, a sort of Islington way, saying, oh, well, if I get a black child coming into my school, I tell the parents, I think your child will be happier up there, and would send them away to keep his school white, which was horrifying.
Yeah. Who was it sang that song, What We Need is a Great Big Melting Pot?
Yeah.
I'm not going to try and sing it. I've tried to sing it before.
Turn out coffee-coloured people by the score.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah. Oh, we may get there eventually.
Yes.
Well,
any more comments or questions?
I think we could go on for quite some time. Well, it's such a fascinating topic. We've all been on the sharp end of an education system. We all know it could be improved. We all know that it's in transition at the moment, and with a certain amount of trepidation about what kind of kids will come out at the end of it, and that you know, the planet's, you know, in a way, many of us had our education and our early professional career in a kind of golden age. you know, we'd survived the war. The economy was on the way up. You know, we got grants to do things. Everybody got a little bit more each. You know, it was there was the Harold Macmillan got elected on "You've Never Had It So Good."
Yeah.
And when I went to university in Nottingham, and the I think it was the Observer did a study of universities, right, and it sort of rated them all, and it said of Nottingham, for our money, the smuggest university, right? and we were sort of going around saying, well, you know, I suppose we are pretty smug actually, but you know, we've every reason to be.
I think a small story of how I was looked upon by the general staff population when I was at senior school was that my brother was a couple of years below me. And so he was walking in the school one day and a teacher looked at him and said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm Roy Bray." And there was a look on this teacher's face and he said, "Oh, you're not his brother, are you?"
Oh dear.
There you go. Being fingered.
Anyway.
You come pre-announced.
Oh yes, I would say, you know, without trying to pick anybody out. Rosalind, we haven't heard at all from you. I'm sure you have some interesting stories.
Thank you, Patsy. I so well enjoyed, maybe it's not the right word, but I felt your pain. And of course, I was at different times feeling guilty and, you know, from being at the other side, at the receiving end of the education. Yeah, so different things rang bells for me when we were talking about the aspirations the school had for your future and so on. And I was educated in a working class school, and it was fascinating. I think I've said this before, that before we went to secondary, they brought in somebody to do career advice with us. And there was never any expectation that we'd go to university. And in fact, the outcome, interestingly, that for all of us was we were either going to be teachers or, as you said, secretaries or whatever. So I thought, I liked the idea, I'd like to be a secretary, and I think I'll latch myself on to somebody who's having to travel abroad, and I would go and be an excellent secretary. I remember doing a shorthand and typing course, and you know, did reasonably well at it. So it just made me laugh. But also it did impact on my decision, this not having an aspiration to go to university, on my subject choices, because for the equivalent of your O levels, we had 9 subjects, and then when we came to our leaving certificate, like your A levels, that was reduced to 7 subjects. So I was always fascinated with my cousins in Northern Ireland, that they only had to do like 3 subjects when they got to the latter part. And I thought that makes a lot more sense, because you could really concentrate on doing well in fewer subjects. But anyway, one of the things I really looked forward to and enjoying was the home economics topic, because we were sewing and cooking and so on. But no one ever said that wasn't regarded as a proper subject when it came to counting what was required for going to university. So even if I thought I might have gone then, it wasn't an option. And as I said, it never occurred in school to tell any of us. But the other thing I was thinking about, you're saying about you know, taking students to your home and so on. I remember in secondary school, our geography teacher invited 5 of us to his home. I think we were working on a project or whatever, but I knew one of my classmates really fancied him. We were all in cahoots as silly girls, you know, thinking, "Oh, is anything going to happen? Will he make a move?" And probably doing the poor man a terrible disservice, you know. He's long since left this earth, but yeah, it's funny from the pupil side of things, you know, what goes through your mind. And the last thing I'll say is just talking about strictness. In primary school, I remember our Irish teacher, he was called Mr. Walsh, and he was quite strict, but he had the little softness came in on a Friday, because if we did well all week, he would tell us ghost stories, or, you know, do something a little bit different. So we got to look forward to that. But we felt he was very fair. And I think that was the important thing. You know, you would take the discipline or whatever, as long as it deemed to be fair.
Like the opposite of telling a group of girls they have to stay behind indefinitely till they finish the work.
Patsy.
I am reminded of one just very small other story as well. In secondary school, in one of the classrooms I was in, there were an uneven number of us pupils, and so myself and 2 other girls got to be at the back of the classroom in a set of 3 to 2 desks. And honestly, well, I think we brought in our own cushions for our seats, and it was kind of like our mini home in this corner. But I remember the maths teacher this day doing stuff on the board, and to my surprise, she called on me to get up and, you know, deal with the equation or whatever it was. And I got so far and I got stuck. I you know, didn't know. And she looked at me very puzzled, and she said, "I'm so surprised. She said, you always look like you're understanding. You always nod in all the right places."
Not in the right places.
I'm a good actress. Oh, but yeah, but overall, I really enjoyed school.
Yeah.
So thank you, Patsy, sort of bringing all those memories back.
Well, I hope some of my ex-pupils would be able to say the same thing, you know, that I enjoyed it.
Right. Well, my friends, I think that comes to a conclusion to this time for today. But next week we have a title which I'm not sure about, and it's by a man called David Pearce, and the title is Riders in the Sky.
David, I've got your surname wrong.
Yeah, but that could work for me. I might come in disguise and do it pseudonymously in some kind of way. Because so just to gently trail this is a childhood obsession finally surfacing, right? And I'm going to want every bit as much love, respect, and support as you've all shown Patsy today. My dad had a book called Flying Saucers Farewell by a man called George Adamski. And my dad was a pretty straight guy. And I thought, what is this book all about? And I read it. And it was factual about the possibility of flying saucers and what this man had done. And I was fascinated. And I was already reading oodles of science fiction. So this has been a strand through my life. And I want to bring it to the surface and make it bang up to date. Anybody who is really skeptical about the possibility of there being life on other planets, I would, it's quite possible you might be foaming at the mouth by the end of it, but the idea would be for everybody to come along and have a little bit of fun, because I just want to surface the topic of ETs and UFOs, which the American government are discussing. The House Committee, the House of Representatives, are having regular hearings about what is it that our Navy are tracking in our skies. So it's, we're in interesting times, and I'm just going to sort of bring that to the surface for a little bit of fun.
Well,
So what did you say his name is again, Ray?
Well, I've got it down as David Pearce.
Pierce.
Good. Okay.
P-E-A-R-C-E.
Okay. Right. Well, let's see what he's going to talk about.
Apologies, everyone. Apologies.
That's a lifelong sci-fi reader, as I can adhere to that. Anyway,
there you go.
That's for next week.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
have a good day, friends.
Thanks.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Patsy.
Thank you. Thank you.